When I was a teenager, my family moved into a Victorian-era terraced house in a small town in the United Kingdom. Houses in the UK can be centuries old, and even a Victorian house has usually seen its fair share of death and tragedy. We moved into number 18 Wyvern Terrace. I'll redact the town name, since some people involved are still alive. And it was immediately obvious that the previous occupants had lived there for a very long time. This was the 1980s, but the most recent decor looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 1970s, and some of it was much older than that. The house had belonged to an extremely elderly couple. Obviously, they hadn't always been old, but they were by the time we bought the place. And the house itself had this heavy feeling. If you've ever lived in a genuinely old home, you'll know exactly what I mean. It wasn't just creaky or drafty, it felt occupied somehow. There were strange details everywhere. In the back guest bedroom, there were what looked like knife gouges in the ceiling, about 8 feet up. No explanation. Downstairs, the parquet floors turned out to be laid on top of another layer of wooden flooring. And then there was the fireplace. It was ornate, beautiful even, but completely bricked up and plastered over. My siblings and I were disappointed when we saw it. A fireplace like that should have been the heart of the house, but instead it was sealed shut, like a tomb. When I asked my dad why, he shrugged and said the chimney stacks in the terrace probably fell into disrepair years ago. We weren't the only house on the street with a sealed fireplace either. 6 months passed. I made friends in the neighborhood, Dano and Danielle, who everyone called Danny. My younger brother Chris hung around with a kid named Tom. We spent our days at the nearby park, doing what kids between 6 and 9 did in the 1980s. No phones, no supervision, just scraped knees and imagination. One afternoon, Danny asked me if I knew the history of my house. I told her what I knew. She shook her head and said that wasn't what she meant. There was a legend about the house. All the neighborhood kids knew it, and apparently it was time I did too. Danny wasn't the kind of kid who played pranks or made things up. So when she started talking, we listened. She told us that back in Victorian times, a young chimney sweep, an orphan, had gotten stuck in the flue. Somehow nobody realized he was trapped up there. For days. I don't know how that could have happened. I still don't. According to the story, the family was sitting in the living room one evening, reading, listening to a gramophone, when there was a sudden thump from the fireplace. Ash exploded into the room. The boy's body had fallen down the chimney. He was emaciated, broken, twisted, but he wasn't dead. The story said he reached out of the fireplace, looked at the family, and croaked a single sentence. "I fell." Then he died. Chris and I went home shaken, but tried to laugh it off, accusing Danny, gently, of trying to scare us. She swore she wasn't. "All I'm saying," she told us, "is be careful of the boy who fell." A few nights later, I dreamed I was trapped in a chimney. I couldn't move. I was upside down. And somehow I knew that the people who sent me up there, a rag-and-bone outfit that doubled as chimney sweeps, knew I'd get stuck. They'd planned to say I abandoned the job. I don't know how I knew that. I just did. Maybe it was my imagination. I'd been reading about chimney sweeps and Victorian orphans since Danny told us the story. But I can't shake the feeling that something reached out to me that night. After that, every time my family sat in the living room watching TV, my eyes kept drifting to the plastered fireplace. I hated it. A storm hit that week. Days of howling wind. The sealed chimney whistled and moaned behind the wall, and it sounded alive. Danny had warned me to be careful. But careful of what? The chimney was sealed. What was the worst that could happen? A thump, a sound, a ghost I couldn't see. I even convinced myself that maybe the boy would sense my sympathy and leave me alone. Then came Friday night. My parents were out at my brother's school nativity play. I stayed home. Danny and Dano came over and we played Mega Drive, Genesis if you're American, until they had to leave. Dano went first. Danny lingered at the doorstep. Looking back, she probably had a crush on me. I was oblivious. What I was focused on was the boy. I asked her, if the chimney was sealed, what could he actually do? She looked at me and said something I'll never forget. The boy who fell doesn't just fall down chimneys, she said. He can fall from anywhere. I thought about the high ceilings, the attic hatch, the sealed flue in the kitchen. I thanked her and shut the door. I stepped into the narrow entry porch, the one with the high ceiling you couldn't see once you stepped out of it, and closed the inner door behind me. Then I heard something fall, behind me, something small, something with weight. And then I heard a voice, a croaking, rasping plea for help, ancient and terrified. I froze, turned slowly. If something had fallen in the porch, it would be on the floor, hidden behind the inner door. The door had a glass panel at the top, and I crept forward, peering down. There was nothing there. Relief flooded me. I turned away. Then I heard it again. I fell. This time it wasn't behind me, it was above me. I looked up. The boy was clinging to the ceiling, spider-like, his neck bent wrong, his body thin and broken. He grinned at me with yellowed teeth. I fell, he said again. Then he let go. I woke up in my bed. My parents were home. I heard them moving around. I convinced myself it was a nightmare, until the next year. The year Chris went missing. Weeks of chaos followed. And maybe that's why it took so long for us to notice the smell in the living room. When my parents finally hired workers to break open the chimney, the plaster barely gave way before there was a thump and a cloud of dust. The workers screamed and ran. Inside the fireplace lay my brother, broken, emaciated. They said he climbed down the chimney himself. Nobody talked about the fact that he couldn't have fit. Nobody mentioned the boy who fell, and I never told anyone what I'd seen. All I know is that house now had 2 boys who fell, and I don't think it ever stopped there.